Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You know, my opposition leaders criticized me and said that every time I do my podcast, especially on YouTube, they can hardly see my face. So I have invested in a light, and this light is so bright that I can actually see myself very well. So I hope this will bring more people to my podcast. Welcome to the next episode of If Comedians Rule the World with President Obonjo. I am recording this podcast on bank holiday. And I want to start by thanking every single one of you who have tuned in either on YouTube or you have downloaded my podcast. We are doing very, very well, despite the fact that the mainstream media is not promoting this podcast, and we know why. We are growing. We are growing. We have more countries downloading our podcast. Civilian governments to democratic nations. It's unbelievable. I am so delighted by the fact that we now have 30 countries. 30 countries have downloaded my podcast. It is the only African dictator podcast, the only president broadcasting with no propaganda, bringing civilians to come and talk to you. With no further ado, I am so pleased, delighted to introduce you to my next guest. My next guest had no choice. I got my people to tell him that I wanted him here today at this time, and there was no choice. It wasn't a case of I've got to walk the dogs or I'm spending time with my wife. The president wants you, and he accepted. Look, this next guest is a great man. I say a great man because I know he is a great man. His name is Chris. He's a highly experienced course leader, facilitator, speaker, and coach. He has developed programs for a wealth of organizations, both in the UK, internationally, both in person and virtually. You see, most of my guests have provided services to so many countries, but they have never provided services to Laughter Republic. But I'm sure after this, Chris will provide his service to Laughter Republic. I met Chris many, many years ago in what I call, for those of you who know that I dabbled with comedy. And I went to this open mic gig where I headlined. It was a fantastic time. You know, that gig, can't remember where, but in London, not outside London, was really fantastic. They really, really loved me. His audience almost carried me out of the venue. It was fantastic. Chris, as the Sexageneran, visually impaired comic from Polish origin in the planet, he is the only one in the planet. We will be discussing visual impairment and age in comedy. What has that done for his comedy? The fact that he's visually impaired and he would have faced a lot of challenges. I hope you got that joke. Visually impaired and he would have faced a lot of challenges. How has he been able to cope? I want to get to understand where Chris has been over the last year or so. How has he coped? Chris, how are you?
Obonjo, I'm very well, thank you. Even though I can't see you very well, but I know you're there.
I know you know I am there.
I know you know that I am there.
Yes.
Or you are there.
Yes. And what is really interesting is this. Your background makes me feel like you're talking to me from space.
Oh, you mean my background behind me rather than my comedy background?
Not the comedy background. The purple. It's purple. It's as if you're like you're in Doctor Who or something. Kind of like.
Oh, yeah. Or maybe in a comedy club, you know.
Yeah, maybe in a
nice backdrop.
Nice backdrop. But how have you been? The last time I saw you was obviously at your comedy club. I think you actually did a gig somewhere away from your normal venue.
Well, as you will know, Obonjo, I run comedy nights as well as performing in Barnet in North London. But for a few gigs, I also ran them for a little while in Hatfield, and I think that's the last time you performed for me.
Yes.
But, the very first night I ran in Barnet, my very first night of All Sorts Comedy, you were the headliner, and it went down fantastic. And that's why I'm really pleased to be here tonight, to be able to tell you that and tell the world that Obonjo did fantastic at my first comedy night that I organised.
Thank you so much. But
people still talk about it. I walk down Barnet High Street and they say, "Hey, how's Obonjo?" And I say, "I don't know. I haven't seen him for ages."
You know, what's really interesting is this. You called me Obonjo. You don't even say President Obonjo. You see, this is what the lockdown has done. You just no respect anymore. You know, apart from that, your background should have my face. You should have posters of my face, but there's nothing. It's just blank.
No, there's nothing. And I do realize that I could be hunted down by your men and dealt with all this transgression.
Yes, you will face the military court for not addressing me properly. But let's move on. I know you do two things. I know you perform comedy, and I know you're a trainer. I'm really interested about your comedy life. What made you go into comedy?
Well, the thing was, Obonjo, do you mind if I call you Obonjo?
Yes, you can call me. You can actually call me President Obonjo.
Well, the thing is, President Obonjo, I many years ago, because I'm of a certain age now, but many years ago, I used to love going to see live comedy back in the 80s. And at the time, there were probably only about 50 people on the circuit, some of whom are big names now, some of whom have disappeared, some of whom are still sort of working the circuit, even though they're not big names. And I would sit in the audience and I would think, oh, I'd love to do this one day. So I'm talking about places like the Original Comedy Store, or I'm talking about the Jongleurs, which of course don't exist anymore. But yeah, when they first started back in the early 80s in South London, and I'd go to these comedy nights and I'd sit there and think, oh, I'd like to do that. I could do that. One day I'm going to do that. And it took me about 35 years before I actually did it. So it was quite a long wait before I actually decided to take to the comedy stage. And my very first gig was a paid gig. Would you believe it, Obonjo? Sorry, President Obonjo. And I earned £1.50 at a gig in Leytonstone in East London. It was a door split. So the acts were all given a proportion of the money that was taken at the door. And my second gig was at the Comedy Store, where my second ever gig was at the Comedy Store when I did the Gong Show. And I was gonged off after 43 seconds. I lasted 43 seconds before being gonged off by the audience. But at least I'd performed at the Comedy Store. I had fulfilled an ambition after waiting 35 years. And then I went on to do many more gigs, about 300 gigs, and then started running nights as well. And I've loved it, absolutely loved it.
I have noticed that there are audience members who watch comedy before deciding whether to perform comedy or not. Who were the people that you were watching in those days that really inspired you?
When you say inspired me, I had my favorites. I mean, the ones that I remember seeing who who are now big names when they were sort of not, pretty much unknown, would be people like Paul Merton and Julian Clary and Joe Brand and Arthur Smith and so on. And you had also Rick Mail and Ade Edmondson and people like that. And then you got others who aren't big names, but they're still on the circuit, like Earl Oaken and Otis Cannelloni and others who are still on the circuit, but they're not necessarily doing big stuff on TV or on radio. And many more, Mark Thomas, the names just could just keep coming. But as I said earlier, there weren't that many, actually, originally, maybe 50 to 100 on the circuit. Whereas now, well, as you know, there are thousands with, Obonjo, standing proud above them all. as the main man.
You flatter me. But it's
Yes,
really
yeah, on purpose.
yeah,
On purpose.
it's really interesting. You say in those days you had only 50 people, and you say now there are 1,000. But I think, as you know, with the lockdown, with the pandemic, the market has saturated.
Yes.
It is crazy. It's
Well,
you
even
know,
before the pandemic, there was an awful lot of people.
yeah. Before the pandemic, there was awfully a lot of people, and we did not need, because I used to hear people talk. Oh, there are too many comedians. We did not need even to say that, because general COVID has reduced the number of comedians in the UK right now. You said it took you 35 years before you got on stage. Why did it take you that long?
I'll be honest with you. I kind of, whereas I had been going to comedy for quite a while back in the 80s. My life went off in other directions. I got married. I got divorced. I did other things. I got involved in various sort of other personal development activities and so on. And I took my eye completely off the comedy ball. And then I met my current partner. We had children. Then, of course, when you have children, that takes you in other directions and so on. And it was interesting because for at least about 20, 25 years, I wasn't really following comedy at all. I mean, I'd sort of watch your, sitcom on TV or watch comedy films, but where it came to stand-up comedy, I wasn't following it at all. And then I decided to put some kind of funny videos onto YouTube, a sort of character that I developed called the Old Polish Gentleman. And then I thought, I wonder whether I could take this on stage. And I literally Googled stand-up comedy gigs in London to try and find out how you get a gig, and it kind of went from there. And sort of so this is 6 years ago, and for the last 6 years, I've built up lots of connections and friends on the comedy circuit. I'm hoping one day you'll be my friend, and that way I've kind of plugged back into it after many years.
Wow.
And I'm really glad I have, because I always used to think that the comedy business was really bitchy and nasty and unpleasant, and I think that's why I didn't go for it first time round. But actually, I'd say the opposite is true. Most people are absolutely lovely, even you.
Thank you very much.
Despite being a dictator,
it's not true what they say about me. The Western media.
You're not unpleasant.
Yeah, the Western media has got it absolutely wrong. They have. It really irritates me when they put things in the press about me that is not right. But we that's for another day. Tell me about your visual impairment and how has that enhanced or affected your comedy?
Well, I think you'll agree that any comedian really needs to have some kind of USP, unique selling point. So you are a dictator and president of an African country, and probably the only comedian on the planet who has that under his belt. And I'm similar. That I'm, as you said earlier in your introduction, I think I'm the only 60-something visually impaired comedian of Polish descent on the planet. And the visual impairment, which you asked about, I think has been, as you may have seen in my act when I've performed live, is a big part of what informs my comedy, because so many funny things do happen. It's very frustrating. I have a condition called retinitis pigmentosa, which is I'm kind of gradually losing my sight, and luckily I still do have some vision, but not as much as I used to have. And what it means is that I have all kinds of mishaps, hilarious things happening, and I can convert that into comedy on the stage, and it seems to go down pretty well. I bring, like most good comedians, I try to bring real life to my comedy.
Do you think that at times that audiences react differently to you because you say you're visually impaired? Do you think that those funny stories that you tell hold people from laughing because they think it might be wrong to be laughing at jokes about visual impairment?
Obonjo, I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
I'm free. We're freezing there for a moment.
Yeah, this happens. This happens a lot. It doesn't happen in any other podcast. It's the MFI, the FBI, MFI. They are watching this, and can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
And it's also raining outside. It's raining outside, so it might be affecting the signal. The question I asked is when you deliver jokes or stories about your visual impairment, do you think that holds the audience back? Do you feel that some audiences will say, oh, we shouldn't really be laughing at jokes about disability, for example?
Right. Yeah. It's an interesting one, because all I'm doing is I'm laughing at myself.
Yeah.
I'm not laughing at somebody else.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that blind man over there is really funny, or that woman over there in the wheelchair is really funny. I'm just talking about myself and my experiences and things that have made me laugh when I've had any kind of mishap or whatever. And I think that's okay. This word disability is interesting, because it's interesting because I don't think I'm disabled. If my computer is disabled, it doesn't work at all. So I do have a visual impairment, but if I was disabled, I would be under the covers in bed and not moving. If that makes sense.
Yes.
So it's just one aspect of who I am, and I just laugh at myself. And I don't project that onto other people and have make comedy at their expense. And I think we all have a right to make comedy at our own expense if we choose to, and that's okay. And it makes people laugh, and I don't think people are embarrassed by it. I'd rather laugh about it than cry about it. But in other ways, I'm a straight white male, and you could argue that in that respect, I'm quite conventional, or one of the majority of people out there. So there's a balance. There's a interesting. Well, I say balance, a kind of a slight paradox there.
So I know you said you're the only visually impaired over 60 Polish comedian in the world. That is a lovely award to give yourself. Are you in touch with other visually impaired comedians?
I do know. I've met a few on the circuit. I wouldn't say that I'm in regular contact with them. There are a few. There's one or two who are pretty well known now. You might have heard of Chris Markiewicz. I haven't met him, but he's probably the best known at the moment. And there are one or two others that I have performed at my night, for example, because I like to have various interesting acts performing at my comedy nights, and partly why it's called All Sorts, because it's all sorts of acts. So there are two or three that I have performed with, or had performed at my night. Not that we stand around talking about visual impairment all the time, but certainly there are a few, and sometimes they major on that, sometimes they don't. One act that I had who is visually impaired, I don't think she said a single thing about her visual impairment when she performed. She was choosing not to use that as her USP, but I knew for a fact that she was visually impaired. So depends whether you want to bring that to the show or not, when you've got other things to bring, other life experiences. So there are things to do with me being Polish that I bring, things to do with me being older that I might bring, and other stuff that's not relevant to any of those things. But it's fun.
And what other challenges that you've faced as a result of being visually impaired as a comic in the circuit?
Without getting too heavy about it, I have found that being out and about on the circuit, especially if I'm on my own, can be quite challenging, because you're in a darkened room. You come to the end of a gig, people are all getting together, chatting, engaging with each other and so on. And I kind of escape, because I find it very difficult to mingle in a dark environment and not being able to see particularly well at all. So I tend to sort of get frightened off and go home, which is what this is why in the last year or so, what I've really enjoyed is engaging with people on Zoom, even though I haven't been doing comedy on Zoom, because I can see people perfectly well on the screen, or reasonably well on the screen, and I don't have to try and engage with people in person. So I found that quite challenging, and I think comedians, I think quite often have that challenge. How can I put it? There's a certain, I don't know if you've experienced this. There's something about being on a stage that feels more comfortable than being at a party or having to mingle with people at an event, because you're kind of holding the room. So whether I'm on stage or I'm at the front of a training room, I won't say I'm in charge, but I'm kind of holding court, and that's very comfortable for me. But when I'm sort of in sort of having to socialize, then I find that quite difficult, and I'm more likely to then want to escape. I know other comedians who aren't visually impaired have similar issues. I think it's quite common, so I think that's a big challenge. Getting to gigs and getting back from the gigs can be a challenge, especially if I'm traveling on my own, and late at night and so on. But I have what I call my skinny white friend, and which is my white cane, that goes everywhere with me. So I have my, so with my white cane, I sort of get about, and hopefully I don't have any mishaps. I fell off a train platform once a few years ago. So you got to be careful. And of course, you fall off a train platform. There's comedy in that, isn't there?
Yeah. Yeah. If you're into dark humor.
yeah. You got blood gushing out your head, and you've broken your arms and your legs. There's comedy in that.
I love to see people in blood. So the being Polish, how many Polish comedians are in the UK that you know?
Not many. But I have done Polish gigs in the UK.
Okay.
And there were Polish gigs in London, Polish language gigs, where they were mainly bringing people over from Poland, young comedians from Poland. So I thought I'd give that a go, and I did a couple of gigs in Polish, because Polish was my first language. I didn't speak any English until I was about 5. I mean, English is my primary language now, but Polish was my first language. So that was quite interesting. And in fact, one of the gigs I did in Polish, I got up on the stage, and there was a group of English people in the room who didn't speak any Polish, and I started doing my act in Polish, and of course they couldn't understand very much of what I was saying. And then I turned round to them at their table, and I then sort of said to them in English, "How you doing there? All right? How's it going?" and like they kind of were completely shocked, because they didn't realise I spoke English. Wow. But I was from the UK. But there are some comedians of Polish descent who are a bit like myself. But I suppose the one you and I might know well is Andy Zapp, who is an old Polish geezer like me. So we sometimes have good chats and so on. And there are a few others, yeah. Again, do they bring their Polishness to it? Not necessarily, but they happen to be of that descent.
Yeah, I never knew Andy Zapp had Polish descent.
Yeah, he's Polish. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
And there are others. I'm trying to think who else, but there are a few. Yeah.
Let's talk about age, because you are mature, if I say so.
Listen, but I'm every age up to 65. It's always going to be like rings in a tree.
So you came back you started performing comedy again 6 years ago, is that correct?
Yeah.
What was that like? So you were obviously over 50. Let's just leave it.
Yeah. I was 59.
Yeah, 59. What was that like, coming over to perform comedy, and you had all these young? I have this, because I started performing comedy at the age of 45, and
that's young.
Yeah, that's young. And I remember the younger black comics used to call me uncle, because obviously I was much older than them. And I used to think, wow, I'm old enough to be their father, and
Yeah.
and I'm out there performing and competing with them to get gigs. What was that like for you at the age of 59, uh, coming into the
It,
comedy circuit?
it felt a bit odd to start with, but I know it sounds like a bit of a cliche, but I'm quite young at heart. I wouldn't say that I'm a typical 60, 65-year-old. um, I'm quite kind of um, jolly and mess around a lot. uh, I let me put it this way. One of my biggest fears, Obonjo, is to end up being patronized as I get older. And I think the main antidote to that is to have a sense of humor. Yeah, to have a sense of humor. So I would hate, whether it be carers or relatives or nurses as I get older and older, to treat me like I'm a child. And I think, as I say, what's going to help prevent that happen is to maintain a sense of humor and to do the comedy. There are comedians out there who are older than me, and it was lovely to discover that. And I, I don't have difficulty engaging with younger people, with younger comics, and having a laugh with them. I've got two children, as you might be aware, in their early 20s, and their mates seem to think I'm great a lot of the time. I won't go as far as to say that I'm cool, but they seem to find me good company and amusing company and so on. So thankfully, I seem to have that capacity to be able to engage with those younger people. I don't recall, to be honest, feeling in any way kind of too old or left out of things. I just got on with it, and got up on stage and did my bit and made people laugh, and it seemed to work. So yeah, I don't recall having any kind of hang up about it, put it that way.
Mm-hmm. So you've spoken to me about your children, and they think you're cool. But what about
Well, I don't know if they think I'm cool, but I'm okay.
Because some of them might have found you really embarrassing at the very
Yeah,
beginning. Yeah. What about your friends your age? Because because one of the things I agree with you on is the fact that I certainly feel young at heart. I
yeah,
definitely feel, when I compare myself to my classmates, people I went to school with, and my age, their level of thinking is just totally different. I always say to them, they talk as if they're getting ready to die. I don't see death yet. I actually enjoy the fact that I'm out there performing, and it makes me
yeah.
feel younger as a result. What about your age mates? How did they react to? Did they say, for example, I used to have friends tell me, "Oh, you sure you don't have a midlife crisis, or there's something or there's something wrong with you?" And I always respond, at least I'm not ending up buying myself a motorcycle,
No.
or pierce my ear, or I have several girlfriends as a way of just keeping in touch. Do you understand what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
how did your classmates, your age mates, respond to you?
I think generally they thought it. I think generally they thought it was great.
Ah,
I'm not.
nice.
I'm not aware. I'm not consciously aware of anybody sort of feeling overly embarrassed at the idea of me doing this. I think there's always that concern that if friends come to see you perform live, is it going to go okay, and or are they going to feel embarrassed for me, or or in some way ashamed or whatever. I didn't really get that kind of impression. There are people who've come to see me perform. There are other people I know who haven't come to see me perform. Sometimes it might just be that they're not into stand-up comedy, and that's perfectly okay. But I mean, how can I put it? My life is a little bit unconventional, in as much as I don't always follow the crowd in one way or another, and I think the comedy was kind of part of that. So I've always been a little bit off the wall one way or another. For many years we didn't have TV in the house because we just chose not to have a TV. And people would say, why haven't you got a TV? We get on with life. We don't feel we need a TV. Our children were home educated. Our children didn't go to school until the sixth form. So, we have a slightly kind of different life anyway, which kind of left some friends and family a bit bemused. And again, maybe it was a reasonable kind of foundation on which to sort of do some comedy, and something that a lot of people of my age or our age wouldn't even think of doing. But I am surprised, Obonjo, just how many older comedians there are around. There's quite a lot of us. And as you know, I do have sort of regular Zoom get-togethers with the older comedians.
which I've not been able to make, but I will make.
No, that's fine. I know you've joined us a couple of times.
Yes,
but it's been lovely. It's lovely to have contemporaries who have similar kind of points of reference.
You're talking, and it reminds me of a leaflet that I got recently at home. It's called the McCarthy Homes, and it basically said it's a retirement home. And it said, are you over 60? Don't you want to be around people your age? If so, we have some some retirement homes. And I'm not even 60, and they're already sending me that stuff.
Yeah.
What about in terms of your age? So we've spoken about age in terms of your friends. Age in the comedy circuit, do you think that there is age discrimination? Do you feel that there is discrimination in the circuit because of your age? Because there's a view that people who control the industry prefer younger people than mature people like you.
I would say that's almost definitely the case. It's not something that concerns me personally, because I don't see myself as being a career comedian. It's not. I didn't go into comedy to make a career of it. So I wasn't dreaming of, doing live at the Apollo or whatever. I did get talent scouted after about my 15th gig. I was doing a gig at the Cavendish in Stockwell, and I got an email from Britain's Got Talent to go for a producer's audition, which I went for, but I didn't get through, which is fine, because that's not why I'm doing it. But I think if somebody is, let's say, I don't know what age to put on it, maybe over 35 or over 40, and they're looking to carve out a career in comedy, I think it's probably tougher for them than it is for people who are younger. But to what extent there is active discrimination, I don't know. I mean, there are some older comedians coming through 50 plus, but whether they're going to be sort of hit the big time in the way that younger people might, I don't really know. But yeah, we live in a world where youth is more acknowledged and more kind of how can I put it? Lauded, if you like. But maybe that's changing. Maybe that's slowly changing. I don't know. I don't know if you have a view on that. I'm not the interviewer.
Yeah, but you are my guest, so I shouldn't really give you the answer. I genuinely think that when I look like the likes, I don't know if you know Dick Gregory. Dick Gregory is a Black African American comedian who's dead now. He continued performing until he died. I think he was over 80, and he still kept, performing comedy.
Yeah.
But I guess because he started, I'm not sure when he started, but I'm sure he must have started pretty early, and so we had longevity. I'm sure if Richard Pryor was still alive, he would still be performing comedy. Do you get what I'm saying? They will still be performing. Performing comedy. But my thoughts on this is that I genuinely think that the pandemic has opened opportunities for older comics. Essentially, if you're technology savvy, you no longer have to go through the gatekeepers. To actually get your comedy out there.
Sure.
And that's my. It all depends on what you want. It's really interesting. You spoke about career comedy. You didn't want to have comedy as a career.
I wasn't chasing it. If it became a career, I might have gone for it, but I wasn't chasing it.
Yeah. It's really interesting because do you think that many comics, when they first start, they think that they want to do it as a career, or they just want to do this as something, as a hobby, or Or what do you what
I,
is
th-
your
I
view?
think I think it can be anywhere along that scale, really.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I I get the impression that most older people who've gone into comedy are probably just doing it for the experience, not necessarily to have it as a new career. But again, I think it can be either, depending on the individual. And of course, I
Mm,
can't speak for all those other comedians.
mm,
Um, I mean, I do know of one or two people, maybe similar to yourself, who similar age to myself, who yeah have felt frustrated that they're not, they may not be getting the kind of breaks that somebody who's maybe in their 20s.
mm,
Um, and also, you have the stereotype of the 20-something lads in skinny jeans telling knob jokes,
mm,
and that is the whole, that's the universe of comedy. I mean, one of the things that inspired me originally to start my comedy nights, which, as I said earlier, is called All Sorts Comedy with a Z rather than the S on the end, was that both my wife and I, we went to a comedy club in London to watch some comedy, and there were 4 acts on, and every single one of the acts were men in their 20s or 30s telling knob jokes. And I realized it was possible to be both amused and bored at the same time. In as much as, every act was very similar, told very similar kind of jokes, looked very similar. And I thought, no, comedy needs to be a lot more diverse. And I'm not talking about somebody who's, I'm not talking about political correctness here, just that it's much more interesting if you have comedy night with all people of different ages, different backgrounds, different abilities and capabilities, different cultures. And, that's what I try to do and contribute to, because, you could argue that I have, the fact that I'm older and visually impaired and have a Polish name and so on and so forth. Just adds a little bit more spice to an evening of comedy, rather than having 6 young male white heterosexual acts in a row, telling the same kind of jokes,
mm.
which can be very funny. So your original question, I think age discrimination probably does exist. I mean, I know for a fact it does exist with some promoters. But I don't allow it to give me. I don't allow it to bug me. But maybe that's because I'm not a career comedian. I mean, for example, I've never done Edinburgh because I don't see the point of doing Edinburgh, because I'm not looking to progress. So a room full of people laughing in London is going to be just as much fun for me as a room full of people laughing in Edinburgh,
Mm,
if we ever have rooms full of people again.
mm, mm,
Um, but that's where I'm coming from.
mm,
So, but I'm not aware I've had difficulty getting gigs in the past.
mm,
I mean, because of my age, but I may be wrong. Who knows?
mm. Let's talk about your comedy club, All Sorts Comedy Club. Such a very great, fantastic club, and I love the marketing of it all. I remember receiving packs, a pack of a packet of sweets, and
Oh yeah,
really lovely marketing. How easy was it for you to set up the club and for you to manage the club?
right. Actually, not so hard, and it's a question I've been asked quite a few times, because it is a very well attended night. It only runs once a month, um, in up here in Barnet in North London, not far from you actually, am I? Because you're in St
Mm,
Albans,
mm,
and um, we were very, very fortunate, because both myself and Ingrid, my wife, have lived in the area for many years, and we have neighbours, we have friends, and so on. Um, and the pub, the landlord of the pub, it's called the Queen's Arms in Barnet, has been very, very supportive in promoting the night and putting up posters in the pub every month and so on and so forth. So we we've never had an empty room, put it that way, in the sort of 3 years or whatever it was that we've been running the night. And what's interesting is that the demographic tends to be older. So 30 plus rather than the, youngsters. I mean, we do get young people in, don't get me wrong, but generally speaking, it sort of ranges from about 30 plus up to people in their 70s or 80s. And I can't help thinking that there is an untapped older demographic who enjoy stand-up comedy. Because again, you think you go to a club in central London or in East London or whatever, you're going to have, a room full of 20-somethings probably. But when you have a place like Barnet, which is just on the outskirts of London, you're very likely to bring in a slightly older crowd. And we put leaflets through local doors around our area, and so on. And then you get word of mouth, of course. So we have been very, very fortunate because, as you're probably aware, I mean, I'm sure we've both played empty rooms any number of times over the years, and promoters scratching their heads thinking, how can I get people in, and so on. And I think the other thing, Obonjo, is that all around, I can only speak for London, all around the edges of London, there'll be pubs that perhaps if they provided stand-up comedy would probably do very nicely off the back of it. Because, what some people have said about Barnet, where our night is, they've said, oh, there's nothing else to do around here. It's fantastic that you're doing this comedy. It's perfect, perfect night out once a month. Doesn't cost us anything because it's free to get in and so on. And maybe there could be any number of other pubs all around the outside edge of London that could do the same kind of thing, and bring in people. So it hasn't really been a problem. We've been very lucky in that respect. But quite a lot of people who come are people who kind of might know us or have friends of friends of myself and of Ingrid, my wife. So that's been very helpful.
Very interesting in terms of what you said about the demographics, especially the older generation.
They love it.
Yeah,
they love it.
So they rather go to a club in Barnet than go to the Comedy Store or go to a place in the West End.
Sure, because it's local. It's less hassle. It's just down the road. It doesn't cost them anything. And we do have young acts on. I mean, you have 20-something acts right through to, people older than me.
Yeah.
And from all sorts of different backgrounds. So, no, they really love it because you think about it. Someone of my age is somebody, who comes to a comedy night is somebody who may well have used to have gone to comedy back in the 80s, and have, kind of rediscovered it.
Yeah.
Other people have never seen stand up at all, and they think, "Wow, this is amazing."
Yeah.
And of course, some people may not like it and not come back. That's a fact of life, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, and what really is amazing, and what really blew my mind when I started doing comedy, was just how many talented comedians there are out there who's nobody's ever heard of. And this may sound a bit kind of contentious, but I listen to some of the comedy on Radio 4, or watch some of the comedy on Netflix or whatever, and I think, I know so many people who are so much better than this person or that person, and so much funnier, who I have on my notes. And that's not me sort of showing off, but it's absolutely true.
Yeah.
There are some really, really talented people around who aren't household names and perhaps aren't earning anything from it, but are really funny.
Yeah. What's the future for All Sorts Comedy? Are you planning to have to continue your comedy nights as soon as the lockdown eases?
Yeah. So the plan, all being well, is from the 7th of July that we run once a month again on the first Wednesday of every month. So I had a call. Well, funny enough, I had an approach from the landlord at the pub last week saying, "Can we start again?" So he's come to me saying, "Can you start the comedy nights again?" Which is nice. Yeah. Excuse me, I'm just pouring a bit of beer because that's the kind of person I am. So he's asked if we're happy to get going again on the 7th of July. So that's what we're going to do. All being well, I mean, who knows? But that's the plan, and then run once a month again from there. So we'll probably have rather rusty comedians playing to a rusty audience. And that's what is likely to be happening. And I'm really looking forward to it. I'm a bit nervous because it hasn't run for a while, but really looking forward to it sort of kicking off again, because it's, you know, and it's kind of a family affair as well, because I don't know if you recall, my wife is involved in it. My son does it on the technical side. My daughter, when she's around, she's always there helping as well. She's, you know, often she's away from home, but so, you know, it's a nice kind of family atmosphere.
I think it's going to be a fantastic night. You know, it's really interesting how I've heard people say, there are even comedy teachers who are basically saying, we will teach you how to do comedy again, or, you know, just to get rid of the rustiness. And so I think there are three things that you need to bear in mind. Obviously, the comedy promoter is rusty, the comedians are rusty, and then you have the audience who haven't been to a live gig for, they're also going to be rusty.
Yeah, and I think what I'm also counting on is that they're going to be forgiving of, you know.
No, I can confidently say that during the first lockdown, I mean, after the first lockdown, and there was a bit of easing of restrictions, I did a few gigs, and the audiences were very, very forgiving. But no, it was also an emotional thing, because it was like they missed seeing comedians, and comedians missed performing in front of audiences. So it was electric. It's going to be like, you know, a balloon gets busted. You know, you put a pin in a balloon, and it will be a sigh of relief. It will be fantastic. There's nothing to worry about. I'll be surprised if there are any gigs happening for the first time once the lockdown has eased and people die. I don't think so. I genuinely think that it would just be a relief to see people perform again, and audiences will be forgiven.
And what I always try to do is look after the acts as well. So, for example, last April was the first gig that got cancelled. So what I've done is I've prioritized the acts who were due to perform last April for this first gig in July. So they're getting the first shout.
Yeah.
And then the ones that were booked to do last May will get first shout for August, and so on.
Wow.
And if any can't do it, or they stop doing comedy, then I'll draft somebody else in or whatever.
You're so well organized. I genuinely don't know how many comedians have decided, because there was some research done. I don't know if you've been following the research by Live Comedy Association that confirmed how COVID had really impacted the comedy industry, and how some people have actually stopped doing comedy and something else. And it's going to be difficult to get them back, because either financially or mentally, they're not, you know. But it's been really interesting how comedians have been able to adapt, you know, Zoom gigs. I know it's not the same, but we've had to embrace technology just to adapt, because my view is that if you do not change, if you don't adapt, you just naturally die, basically. It's natural. That's what happens naturally. Look, Chris, this has been really, really fantastic. You know, we started and we had a discussion behind the scenes that the art of conversation is a wonderful thing. And you were asking how long this was going to go on for. But I can confidently tell you that because we've been enjoying ourselves, it's now 9:17. So we've been going on for at least well over 50 minutes, which is fantastic. And I told you,
well, it's gone way past my bedtime. I should have been in bed.
It's gone past your bedtime, and you also should.
Yeah, I'm a little old man. I can't.
What time?
Sit up all night.
What time do you normally go to bed?
All my bits are shriveling up. What time? Do you know what? It can be as early as 8 o'clock. It can be as late as midnight.
Really?
Yeah. Sometimes I go to bed very early.
So, and do you end up waking up in the middle of night to take a piss?
Yeah.
Okay, that comes with age, doesn't it?
There's a lovely line from a Netflix comedy where you got the old guy. I think it's Alan Arkin, the actor, saying, "Nowadays I piss in Morse code."
Look,
sometimes I'm up at night, and so on. But but yeah, hey, that's my private life.
Yeah, that's it. I didn't come.
No, I
To
don't talk about that.
I didn't come to interrogate you.
I don't talk about that on podcasts.
Well, it's all part of age. Anyway, look, Chris, it's been fantastic having you here.
Thank you.
I wish you every success with your comedy club and everything else that you plan and wish for yourself. It's good to see you healthy, intact, and I think we've had a very beautiful conversation, from visual impairment to age, to being Polish, to the challenges of being an older comic. And I just admire your positivity. I don't feel like I've been talking to someone over 60. I feel like I've been talking to someone young who has a very fresh and positive outlook to life. If that's good feedback, that's what I wanted to.
Well, every age is inside me. Like rings in a tree.
Yes.
I could show you my inner 2-year-old, or my inner 8-year-old, or my inner 15-year-old.
Yeah.
It's all in there.
Yeah. So for my listeners and viewers, I've just been speaking to Chris for well over 50 minutes. He's a comedy promoter, a comedian, a public speaker, a husband, a wife, a father, a father to his children. Not a wife yet. And I want to thank him immensely for joining me, because it was short notice. Chris, if people want to find you or want to hear about your club, this is your opportunity to give your club a plug.
Yeah, thank you. But probably the best place is on Facebook, and it's All Sorts, but it's ALLSORTZ on the end, not S on the end, but the Z. So you've got A at the beginning, A to Z, All Sorts Comedy, and that's on Facebook. I'm not massive on social media, so that's probably the best way to find out about the gigs and the nights and so on. I am on Twitter, but I haven't used it for about 5 years, so I'm a bit remiss in that. In that respect, I'm an old man. I'm not very into the social media side of things. Facebook, All Sorts Comedy is probably the best place to find out what's going on and gigs and so on.
I don't think you're missing anything on Twitter, my friend. The people on Twitter, they make me laugh. They are not happy with their government, but they will always constantly hide behind the keyboard and complain about their government and say, Boris Johnson must go. Oh, Johnson must go. But that is all that happens. Johnson is still very much alive. They think they can start a revolution by just being on Twitter, hiding behind their keyboards. They get retweets and tweets and likes. That's all. Nothing else is happening. Nothing else. You are missing nothing on Twitter. Chris, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Fantastic. I will let you know when I publish this so you can share this with your people. I had to, I was not distracted, but I had to make sure I had supply on my power for my laptop because it was getting weak. But look, I hope you have enjoyed it. You have no choice. You have enjoyed this, haven't you? I'm sure you will tell me you have enjoyed this.
Yeah, it's been lovely. Thank you very much.
Yes, and I will try and make your Zoom community invite. I know I've got the invite. There are times I have clashes, but it'd be good to meet my fellow Mikati home people.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll just say, all hail great president.
Thank you very much, my folks. Thank you so much for watching and listening to this. You will agree with me that, look, the beauty of podcasting is you discover things that you don't necessarily know about your guest. And this has been really fantastic, a wonderful journey. Please go and support his comedy club. Even if you are in North Korea, I don't see how you're going to be able to support his comedy club. But who knows? Maybe he might live stream it. He might, get technology savvy and decide to put it on YouTube or whatever. But for those of you who are based in England, All Sorts Comedy Club is a fantastic club. I have played there, and I'm not saying it because I want another gig. I'm just telling you that it is a fantastic comedy club. And I shall end this now. Chris, you have a fantastic and wonderful time, and speak to you soon.
Thank you. Sleep well.
Thank you. Bye.